Over the years I've tested more than 50 audio interfaces, and in this video I will rank the latest ones, give you a brief overview of their pros and cons, and tell you my opinion on each of them. Hey, Julian Kraus here, and as you can see we got a couple of interfaces to talk about today. If you're interested in even more information, you can find detailed reviews for each and every interface on my channel. We will start with the smaller one-channel interfaces and then work our way up to the larger ones, ending with the rack-mounted studio interfaces. Also, if you're planning on buying an interface, consider supporting the channel by using the affiliate links in the video's description. Without further ado, let's start with the ranking, and how could I not start with one of the most well-known interfaces, the Focusrite Scarlett Solo 4th Gen. I like that it now has a separate volume control for the headphone output and main outputs compared to the 3rd generation. Audio quality is generally great, only the headphone output impedance could have been quite a bit lower. By the way, this will be a reoccurring theme in the video, and if you do not know what that means, don't worry, I made a complete video explaining the issue in detail, which I will link below. Some people might not like that the mic input on the Solo is on the back, but that's personal preference. Overall, I think it's a solid pick, and that's why it's in the middle of the great category. Next up is the Audient ID4 and the Mark II specifically. This is a strong competition to the Scarlett Solo, and I would say that they are extremely similar in terms of audio quality. That's to say that they both are great, only the headphone output impedance is once again a bit too high. Biggest downside of the ID4 is that it only has one knob to control the volume of your headphone main out simultaneously, and if you don't want your headphones to play, you have to unplug them. Overall, still a great interface if you just need a single XLR input. Moving to an interface that just refuses to die, and that's the Behringer UM2. It's a plastic fantastic interface, and the sole reason why I think it still exists is that it hardly has any competition in its price range. Measurement wise it's really not too great, but it can record decent audio with proper settings. The biggest issue is that there seems to be no ASIO driver directly available from Behringer, and that's why this interface gets a solid meh from my side. A better pick in my opinion is the MOTU UltraLite-mk5 Solo. While this cheap interface also comes in with a full plastic build and the audio measurements are far from perfect, it is still a step up in noise performance, and you also get a proper ASIO driver. It lacks any kind of companion software, but it does offer all basic functions like direct monitoring with the hardware controls. If you want to spend as little as possible on audio interface, this is probably what I currently would recommend. It's totally okay. By the way, if you enjoyed the video so far, please subscribe and ring the bell to not miss any future videos. Alright, the next one is the Arturia MiniFuse 1, which is one of the few interfaces that you can also get in white, which might already be a big deciding factor. It also has an integrated USB hub, which can be handy to hook up things like a MIDI keyboard. I would rate this a solid mid-tier interface. I don't think it exceeds at anything, but it also does not have any major downsides. It's a decent small white interface. Oh, and you can also get it in black and champagne if you like. Alright, jumping to the Apogee BOOM, and I have to say this is a bit of a mixed bag for me. For the most part, the audio quality is pretty good, but I think Apogee dropped the ball a little on the preamp noise. The Boom has significantly more preamp noise than competing interfaces, all that while typically also being more expensive. I mean, you can still get some good audio out of it with condenser mics, but especially with dynamic mics which rely on low noise preamps, the performance of the Boom is underwhelming. So with the combination of high preamp noise and high price, I see this pretty much in the upper meh category, on the border to good. M-Audio Air 192.4. Don't be confused by the name, this only has one XLR input. Measurement wise, this thing performed quite well and is actually one of the interfaces with the lowest noise preamps. Overall, I would say it's a decent interface, nothing out of the ordinary for audio quality. The housing is plastic and it's overall a pretty basic interface. Nothing particularly wrong with it, but also nothing terribly exciting. A very smack dab in the middle good interface. Alright, Behringer again. The UMC22 is essentially a UM2 but with a metal housing. Sadly, it has the similar drawbacks. The audio quality is pretty meh with a relatively high noise floor, and the ASIO driver is missing. Some people could get it to work with the ASIO for all driver, but for me this just never really worked reliably, and I think the M-Audio UM2x2 Solo is a better pick. Yeah, pretty meh overall. The UMC22 is really starting to show its age. Next up is the Elgato WAVE XLR. This interface is aimed more towards live streamers, and this is evident by the feature set. The WAVE XLR has a built-in limiter which prevents the audio from clipping if you get a bit more excited, and it also has a mute button. The software also lets you process your audio with essentially any VST effect that you like, and it also has some additional audio routing options which can be super handy. I think it's unfortunate that with IEMs there was some audible noise on the headphone output, and generally speaking the audio performance is nothing special. But it's more than good enough for spoken word, and all in all this is a good interface. The next interface looks quite a bit unconventional, and that's the Lewitt CONNECT 2. The biggest deciding factor is probably the touch controls. Some will love it, some will hate it. That's on you to decide. But generally speaking, it's a good interface with an even better software and with some audio processing built directly into the interface. Definitely a bit of an oddball interface, but especially streamer might find this built-in audio processing helpful. Lower grade tier. Not strictly an audio interface, but I wanted to place this USB to XLR cable right in the trash where it belongs. This is actually not any particular one. This is just a placeholder for all the USB to XLR cables, because so far I have not found one with a decent performance, and actually the one that I did end up testing in detail were horrible with audible interference. Again, I can only recommend to stay clear of these and invest the saved money in at least a cheap proper audio interface. If you need your interface to be as small as possible and you want to record on the go, the fittingly named PreSonus AudioBox GO might be worth a look. The audio quality is decent, although it could have been a bit better in my opinion. Especially things like dynamic range are relatively low, and that could lead to some slight noise in very dynamic situations. In most cases you're probably fine, and I would rate this audio quality good enough. If interface size is not a constraint, I think there are better interfaces out there for the same price. Other than that, I think it sits firmly in the lower good category. The Zoom AIM-S22 is the smallest interface of all the ones that I've reviewed so far, and I think that's also its biggest strong point. If you thought the AudioBox GO was small, the AIM-S22 will surprise you. Sadly, the preamp noise is pretty high, and also the noise of the headphone output. For me personally, this is a pretty meh interface, and I would only choose it if I would need the smallest possible interface at the cost of some audio quality. Alright, the next interface is the Audient ID14 Mark II. I quite like the housing of the ID14 with its easy to reach controls and the fact that it is one solid chunk of metal. The audio performance is also great with ultra low noise preamps and excellent dynamic range. Only the headphone output impedance is sadly slightly elevated again. With the software you can also control how much you want to hear from each input, and one benefit I see over the Focusrite 2i2 is that it has an additional digital input and a second pair of main outputs. Really great interface. Speaking of which, let's have a look at the Focusrite Scarlett 2i2 in the 4th generation. It's probably one of the most popular interfaces, and I think it's generally a great interface, especially since they also introduced the software-controlled direct monitoring, which lets you dial in exactly how much you want to hear from each input. Sadly, from the 3rd to the 4th generation, the headphone output impedance took quite a bit hit, and that's pretty much the sole reason why I didn't put this into the excellent category. Otherwise, this interface is great, especially if you use high impedance headphones. Before ranking further audio interfaces, do you want to know how to properly use your audio interface and record, mix and master your songs like a true professional? Then check out this video sponsor, Hofer College. Hofer College is an international online academy for audio engineering and music production. With the Hofer courses, you get access to a lot of in-depth knowledge to grow your expertise in the audio field. In the Hofer online campus you can learn whenever and wherever you want, and with the completion of the online courses you also get a corresponding certificate. With Hofer it's also possible to earn a diploma or bachelor's degree in audio engineering. I checked out their courses myself, and I really like the inclusion of audio samples in their learning material to get a much better understanding of a specific topic. Depending on your chosen course, you also get to work on audio projects, which you send to the Hofer College team, and they will give you direct feedback on your assignment. Besides the courses, the Hofer College has lots of educational videos ranging from audio fundamentals all the way to advanced mastering techniques. The Hofer courses are available in German and English, and Hofer was kind enough to provide me with a discount code you can use for their courses. So if you're just getting started and want to dive deeper into the professional audio world, or you want to pursue a career in audio engineering and music production, check out the Hofer College with the links in the description. Next we got the Behringer UMC202HD. In typical Behringer fashion, this is a very basic 2-channel audio interface. It has one fatal flaw though, and that's that the direct monitoring audio from your channel 1 is only sent to your left and channel 2 is sent to your right on your headphones. This means that when you want to listen to your own voice, you will only hear it on the left. The UMC204HD I've personally never tested, but I assume that it performs very similarly to the 202HD, and it has a button to toggle the sound to mono. Arguably both interfaces are starting to show their age, but if you can find them for a good price, I think they're still a viable option, although they wouldn't be my first pick nowadays. Another budget option is the PreSonus Studio 24C. Like the UMC202HD, this is a bit of an older interface, but the performance is overall pretty decent. It has low noise preamps and a decent amount of dynamic range, but would you know it, also an increased headphone output impedance. The biggest downside I found in testing are the knobs, because they are very close together and that made it a bit fiddly to use the interface. If you can find it for a good price, I think it's a fine interface. Next interface is the Universal Audio Vault 2. This is a direct competitor to the Focusrite 2i2, and I think it competes very well with generally great audio quality and a vintage mode to add some coloration to your sound. The biggest downside I see is the forced registration to get the UA Connect running and to be able to download the Azure driver. That could be a no-go for some. Besides that, I think it's a great interface. It should be no surprise that the exact same is true for the Universal Audio Vault 276. It has the additional benefit of having an integrated hardware compressor, which can give you some initial processing for your recorded audio, and this might shorten the time you need to spend in post. Same great audio quality as the Vault 2, with the same flaw that you have to register an account to set it up in UA Connect. Still a great interface. Another Audient interface, this time the ID24. This is a step up in terms of connectivity from the ID4T Mark II, and it has a cool trick up its sleeve in the form of send and return connections, which allow you to insert outboard gear directly into the signal chain. It also has ADAT extendability, and if it weren't for that high headphone output impedance again, this could have been in the excellent category, as all the other stuff measured extremely well. So let me put this right on the border. Not quite sure what Lewitt has going on with their unconventional looking interfaces. The Connect 6 definitely has a bit of a modern art vibe going on. Besides that, it offers 2 XLR inputs and the same convenient software audio processing of the Connect 2. It's a good interface, but I would say aimed more slightly towards streamers and podcasters with the built-in effects. Overall, it's a decent interface, but because of the slightly weaker technical performance compared to the Connect 2, I'll rank it slightly lower. I'm just realizing how many Audient interfaces are in this ranking. Oh well, next one is the EVO 4, and I would describe this as a beginner-friendly interface, specifically because with the auto gain setting function, the interface can set the gain for you. With the release of EVO Control, the interface is also fully remote controllable from the PC. That also addresses one of the biggest concerns with the EVO 4, and that it only has one knob to control many functions, which in my opinion is not as convenient as having dedicated controls. The housing is a bit plasticky, but not the end of the world. Audio quality was pretty good with low noise preamps, but I think it shouldn't come as a surprise that an audio interface has once again a higher headphone output impedance. Still, I think it's a solid interface. Next up, another smaller interface, and that's the Zoom AMS24. It's definitely a plastic fantastic interface, but that also makes it super light and portable. It even has the space to accept 2 AA batteries, or it can be powered via a battery bank. In my preamp noise test, the AMS24 did not do so well, and I would say that this is its biggest weak spot. If you use condenser mics, this might not be so critical, but that's why it is only a lower good tier interface. Everything I said about the MiniFuse 1 is also valid for the MiniFuse 2. Of course, the MiniFuse 2 has 2 inputs compared to the MiniFuse 1, and it also has a MIDI in and output. Overall, I think the MiniFuse 2 is a solid interface, but the technical performance is more basic, and I think that makes it just a really good interface. And most importantly, you can get it in white, and black, and champagne. The Focusrite Clarett Plus 2 Pre is an interesting interface because it sits in a bit of a weird spot. Audio performance wise, it is a step up from the Scarlett series, but it is also significantly more expensive. So you're already well into the diminishing returns here. Don't get me wrong, it's a really great interface, and as such I will put it on the border to excellent. But I think the Scarlett series has somewhat closed the gap to the Clarett Plus 2 Pre, and for the same price you usually get more I/O with competing interfaces. The Focusrite Vocaster is one of the more unknown interfaces, and it is one of the few, or maybe the only interface from Focusrite that has some built-in audio processing, which is specifically optimized for podcasting. They also pushed an update which makes more settings tunable, and it also has an option to connect a phone via 3.5mm input. You often also can get it for a very reasonable price, and I think that puts it on the border between great and good. Next in line is the MOTU M2. This has been one of my favorite interfaces ever since its release, probably because this interface does not have any bad measurements. Yes, not state of the art anymore, but still a through and through excellent performance, and that's why it belongs in the lower excellent category. I must mention one thing, and that's the internal changed slightly with a hardware revision some time ago, and the unit I tested was prior to that. But from the measurements I have seen, the M2 still performs excellently. Similarly to the M-Audio M-Track Solo, I think the Duo is probably currently the lowest priced 2-channel interface that you should consider. It is a very basic interface with just a plastic housing, but generally it does what you want it to do, and it records and plays back audio with decent quality. It's really nothing special, but it is also totally fine as a budget option. Extremely similar looking and next is the HD version of the M-Track Duo. I can keep this short, and this is right on the border between meh and trash. I mean, it's usable, don't get me wrong, but it has some issues, and as long as they are not fixed, the interface performs worse than the non-HD version at a higher price, so I currently see no point in buying this interface. The Steinberg UR22C was the direct successor to the legendary UR22 Mark II. And I said was because there was a rebranding and the interface is now called Yamaha URX22C. But as far as I'm told, this is literally the same hardware, just with a different name. I think the biggest plus is the latency-free internal audio processing, which offers compression, basic EQ and a couple of amp simulations. Sadly, it has two obvious downsides, and that's, say it with me, high headphone output impedance and high preamp noise compared to competing interfaces. One thing I have to give it though, and that's the Yamaha Steinberg ASIO driver, which has been very reliable for me, and that's actually the reason why I prefer the next interface over this one. And that's the Steinberg IX022, or I should say Yamaha UR22 Mark III, because that's what it's called now after the rebranding. This has an excellent preamp noise performance and much better headphone output measurements compared to the URX22C. It is one of my favorite audio interfaces as it strikes a nice balance between audio quality and price, and if you just need a basic and reliable interface, I can absolutely recommend it. Great interface. Next up, the RME Babyface Pro FS. RME is generally more expensive, but people always claim that you get an excellent interface in return and long-term driver support. And I can absolutely back this up. The Babyface Pro FS has an excellent audio performance and some specialty features like a separate low noise headphone output for REMs, and the mixing and routing options in the Total Mix software are unmatched. This solid block of aluminum also has an excellent build quality, so it belongs right here in the excellent category. The next interface is quite special, and that's the Zoom UAC232. It can record with 32-bit float and has dual ADCs. Don't worry if that doesn't tell you anything. That essentially means that due to its special input and the recording format, you can set your gain in post, and it's also nearly impossible to clip the audio. While I'm very excited to see this technology, the real-world use cases are kind of limited, and the 32-bit float recording is not supported by every software. For people recording very dynamic things like sound effects, this interface can be a game changer. But if you're in a very controlled environment like a studio, the UAC232 is probably not much more helpful than any other interface. If you need an interface that does not clip and supports a 32-bit float, it's great, otherwise just good. Alright, Tascam US-2x2HR. The biggest features in my opinion are the ultra low noise preamps and the MIDI in and outputs. The biggest downside is, once again, a high headphone output impedance that forces you to use high impedance headphones if you want to get an uncolored sound. This interface doesn't get much attention, but if you can find it at a good price, I think it's a decent interface. For the PreSonus AudioBox USB 96, I can keep it pretty short. It has the highest amount of preamp noise of all the interfaces that I've tested, and all the other measurements were also pretty much below average. I know it's a budget option, but even cheaper interfaces manage to bring better performance to the table. For me, this is very much a meh interface, and I think there are better options out there. PreSonus updated their Quantum series a while back, and the ES2 is part of that lineup. Generally speaking, the audio quality is pretty good, and all the settings are controllable from the software. Sadly, you guessed it, it has a pretty high headphone output impedance. And it also has a small quirk in that it requires a second USB connection to power the interface if your PC does not have a USB-C connection. Under specific conditions, I could also introduce some RF interference, so overall the ES2 just didn't blow me away. I think it's still okay, but I also don't see any particular feature that would draw you towards this device. Next one are actually two interfaces, and that's the Solid State Logic SSL2 Mark II and 2 Plus Mark II. They both have the exact same excellent audio quality. Mic preamps are ultra low noise, dynamic range is excellent through and through, and in their price range they even outperform the MOTU UltraLite-mk5. What's also pretty cool is that you get DC coupled outputs and a 4K mode that can add a bit of coloration to your sound. Only downside I can really see is that all the controls are analog and there's no way to remote control them like you can do with some other interfaces. The biggest deciding factor between the 2 and 2 Plus is the amount of in and outputs, with the 2 Plus having a couple more line outputs, another separate headphone amp and MIDI in and outs. Both are excellent interfaces, nothing more to say. The next interface is the E2x2 from Topping. In their typical Topping fashion, they built a very high performing interface, and especially the headphone output is one of the best that I've measured. The biggest downside I see in availability. It's not so easy to come by and you might need to buy it directly from Topping from China. This usually means import tax, and I personally also have no experience how well their customer support works in case something goes wrong. Besides that, I think it's a great interface, right on the border to excellent. Another Focusrite interface, this time the 4i4 in the 4th generation. The software controllable direct monitoring is great, and of course you also have the air mode to quickly give your recordings a bit more boost in clarity. This is one of the few Focusrite interfaces that has MIDI, which is great, but sadly it does not have any expandability with digital I/O, so that's something to consider. Surprisingly, the 4i4 has much less of an issue with the headphone output impedance compared to the 2i2 and Solo, and that's why I will place it slightly higher on the border to excellent. Let's hop over to the 4-channel audio interfaces, and the first one is the Audient ID44 Mark II. The ID44 takes over the feature with the send and returns to incorporate outboard gear directly into the signal chain from the ID24. But it also adds a couple more in and outputs and even more aided expandability. The audio quality is excellent, and if it weren't for the high headphone output impedance again, I would have placed this in the excellent category. So now I will just set it right on the border to great. Behringer really knows how to play the long game. The UMC404HD is at this point nearly 10 years on the market, and I think it's still a viable option because of its low price. Obviously you can't expect technical perfection in this price range, but I would argue that it is already good enough for many situations. Nothing more to say, a totally valid pick for a budget 4-channel interface. It's good. Alright, one more step up in terms of I/O, and now we're looking at 8-channel interfaces. The Audient EVO 16 is one of them, and it is fully controllable via software, which is quite nice, so you don't have to reach for the interface. FYI, there's also the SP8, which is a matching preamp which can integrate with the EVO 16 and extend the number of inputs. The SP8 and EVO 16 combination handles essentially just like one bigger interface, and still is fully remote controllable. There are no built-in software effects, no DC coupling, and surprise surprise, the headphone output impedance is once again a bit too high for my liking. Overall, I think it's still a seriously great interface, especially for its price. Another software controllable interface is the Focusrite Scarlett 8920 4th Gen. The 8920 is also rack mountable, and like the smaller Scarlett variants, you can also find the air mode and auto gain. It doesn't have any DC coupled outputs, nor does it have any integrated software effects, so in that aspect it's a bit more of a bare bones interface. But it has an excellent audio performance with all the in and outputs, and this is likely what many people will be happy with. Again, if it weren't for the slightly increased headphone output impedance, I would have put this into the excellent category. So let's put this right on the border to great. The next interface is the Audient ID48. As you would expect from an interface this size, it has many in and outputs, has ADAT extension capabilities, and is rack mountable. The biggest feature of the ID48 is probably the send and return connections, but compared to other interfaces you get these for all 8 analog inputs, and that means that you can insert separate analog outboard gear for each channel if you like. You can also completely bypass the ID48's preamps this way. And let me tell you something surprising. The ID48 actually has a really low headphone output impedance and generally an excellent output performance. In my tests I noticed that the 2-channel closest to the power supply did have some slight audible interference at the maximum gain setting. This likely isn't relevant in most cases, but it is a tiny flaw on the otherwise excellent performance. So with that I put it in the lower excellent category. Another rack mountable interface, the Universal Audio Volt 876. As you would expect from an interface like this, it has lots of I/O and ADAT expandability. The vintage mode and the 7.6 comp can be also quite handy to have if you want to give your recorded audio some processing. The outputs are also DC coupled, and the majority of settings can also be adjusted via software. For some reason this is not the case for the headphone volume knobs, and they are physically close together, which was bugging me a bit when adjusting the volume. The headphone output impedance was also a bit too high for my taste, and there's also this thing with the forced registration for the UA Connect software. That's why I would position this right on the border between excellent and great. I reviewed the MOTU UltraLite-mk5 some years ago, but I think it's still a reference that I compare other interfaces to in terms of technical performance. It has quite a lot of I/O, and the audio quality is excellent with low noise preamps, and it also has one of the best headphone output performances that I measured. The biggest downside I see is that compared to other high channel count interfaces, the UltraLite-mk5 only has 2 microphone inputs, and the other ones are line level inputs only. So if you want more microphone inputs, you need an additional mic preamp. Still, because of the excellent technical performance and the built-in audio processing and great mixing and routing functionality, this interface sits firmly in the excellent category. The Arturia AudioFuse 16 rig is, in my opinion, especially interesting if you use audio gear like synthesizers, as the DC coupled outputs lets you send control voltage to these devices. The mixing and routing functionality is also on an extremely high level, and the audio quality is excellent through and through. Similarly to the UltraLite-mk5, the 16 rig only has 2 microphone inputs and additional line inputs, and if you need more mic inputs, you need an additional mic preamp. Still, overall, excellent interface. Last but not least, the solid-state logic SSL 18. Like with the other interfaces, solid-state logic nails the look of the SSL series by giving them an old console vibe, which also reflects in their software. But this is far from old technology, because the SSL 18 has ultra-low noise preamps, excellent dynamic range, and one of the best headphone outputs that I've measured. It also has DC coupled outputs, and it also allows you to insert outboard gear into the signal chain. The biggest con I see is that all of the controls are purely analog, so you will have to reach for the interface to change a setting instead of doing that via the software, like on some other interfaces. But all in all, an excellent interface with the features and audio quality that it provides. Yeah, that's all the latest interfaces I've personally tested so far. I think it's nice to see that the audio quality has generally improved over the last years, and as you can see, the majority of interfaces sit in the good and great category. It's cool that the more expensive interfaces are pretty much all located in the excellent category, or at least very close to it. Obviously, this is not a complete overview, and there are even more interfaces out there. Sometimes I get the feeling there are a couple too many interfaces on the market, and it can be quite challenging to find the correct one. Then again, because most of them perform great these days, you can often focus much more on the features that you need, and the likelihood of choosing at least a decent interface these days is very high. Now, I would love to hear from you, which audio interface do you use and how has your experience been with it? So head down to the comments and let me know. That's all for now. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you all in the next one.